Great. Well, welcome everyone. We're so glad to have you. This webinar is brought to you by a whole bunch of very smart people. So we're really glad that everyone was able to take the time to join us this morning. This is Teaching in Real Time, Maximizing Instructional Time Online, something we are still learning about, but we have several brave people who are willing to share their experiences and learnings and successes and challenges so far. So I'm going to hand it over to Susan first to tell us a little bit about who's going to be presenting today. And then we'll be back to make sure you have all the tech information you need, and then we'll get started with the content of the webinar. So welcome, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. So your facilitators this morning are me, and I'm sharing my January picture from out on the tundra when I was up visiting my family on the farm, and my lovely colleague, Andrea. Do you want to introduce yourself, Andrea?
Hi, nice to see everybody this morning. This is going to be a really, really great webinar because we have some super amazing teachers have been doing wonderful things that they're going to share with you.
And then we have our friends from Atlas today too, and you can go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Thank you. So I think go ahead and hit the next slide there. We've got so I'm here. I'm Patsy, and I'm there it is. I'm the director of Atlas, and we're housed at Hamline University, and I am joined by two people who've learned a great deal about Zoom in the last few weeks, Gail and Marisa. Do you guys want to unmute and say hello?
Hi, everyone. I'm Marisa Giesler, the Operations Manager for Atlas.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gail Rutan, and I'm the Events Manager at Atlas. Welcome.
It has suddenly become our virtual events manager. So yeah, here's to learning new things. So thanks to this team for all of their diligent work, and then the collaboration that's happened with Susan and Andrea and the presenters over the last few weeks to put this together. So thanks.
Yeah, and then we're going to actually have Marisa give everybody a little technical walkthrough here on options you have in Zoom. So take it away, Marisa.
All righty. So if we can see the next slide here. For this webinar, we're going to ask everyone to keep their mic muted and their video off unless the presenters ask you. So that's over on the left-hand side of your toolbar. You may have to hover your mouse over the bottom of your Zoom screen in order to reveal that toolbar. And then if you look way over on the right-hand side, you'll see that we do have an option for closed captioning. If you need that, just click on the small little up arrow near there and click on turn on, what does it say? I'm sorry, now I'm going from memory. Show subtitles, I think is what it says. Reactions are over on the very far right. The presenters may ask you to use those. There's a little thumbs up and a clapping reaction. And then we're going to talk about these two in the middle, the participants and the chat tabs. So if you can go to the next slide, Susan. Everybody, if click on, I think it's chat that's next. If we can have the next slide.
Yep, I already brought it up, but there's probably a little bit of a lag.
Okay, there we go. So everyone click on chat. That will reveal the chat box, and you can see down at the bottom, this is where you can chat questions, comments. If you're having any technical issues, you can change everyone to Gail Rutan. Just find Gail Rutan in the list and chat your questions to her. She will help you out with your tech problems. And then everyone can, if we go to the next slide here, do click on participants. And clicking on participants reveals the participants box, and then you can see here where you can raise your hand. So if the presenters ask you to raise your hand, or if you have any questions and you want to be recognized, you can just raise your hand here. For those of you who are calling in today, all you need to do to raise your hand is to press *9, and that will do the job. So I think that's all we really have for Zoom techie stuff. It's a pretty easy platform to navigate, I think. So back to you.
All right, thanks, Marisa. So the first thing we're actually going to start with is a little bit of a warm-up for everybody who's here today. And we recognize that sort of nobody signed up for this reality that we're in now, where suddenly all instruction has left the physical building and gone out into the virtual world. But what are some silver linings from that? What have been some opportunities of this new way of doing adult basic education? What's come up that surprised you and is surprised you maybe in a good way? So if you can go into the text chat and just share a few thoughts about teaching online synchronously and asynchronously, we'd love to hear from you. I like that one from Sherry. It's like going to the gym, right? It hurts, but you know it's for a good cause. Kaya, yes, actually, you know, distance instruction can be an equity tool for some individuals who were previously excluded. It now maybe excludes different people in a different way. Yes, I like that one from Anne too. Our students are capable of a lot. Oh, and I just got a mention from Marisa to remind everybody that in webinars on Zoom and pretty much every platform that I'm aware of, text chat is visible to all of the organizers after the event, and that includes private text chats, so just be aware of that. If you want to have an actual private conversation, you'll have to email people or text them on your phone. Andy says he likes seeing the students' children. I don't, yeah, and pets. I've seen a lot of pets. This is really great. Thanks everybody for sharing. You can continue to add things in the text chat as we go along. I am actually going to turn off my camera at this point and turn it over to our first panelist. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I take that back. First, I have to tell you a little bit about what we actually asked our panelists to talk about. So the objectives for the session are to look at the benefits of a blended learning environment that mixes both synchronous and asynchronous instruction, kind of identify some tasks that are best done asynchronously or done face-to-face online. How do we maximize the student-to-student interaction time we have, since we know it's limited? How do we make the best use of that time? And then troubleshoot or highlight some features of platforms that some of our panelists are using to provide really engaging instruction in a real-time format. So Andrea is actually going to take over now and tell us a little bit about a minimalist approach to online teaching.
Yeah, there is a great article that is not very long, which I feel like is what we're all looking for at the moment, that Bergen Young from Literacy Minnesota found. And it has 2 golden rules to teaching. The first one is keep it basic. So talking about picking one video conferencing platform for live sessions and sticking with that. Picking one learning management system for assignments and messages, and only doing that one, not doing a lot of shopping around and trying different things. And then learning and using the basic features only. We don't have to get too fancy to be able to deliver really, really good instruction. Golden rule number 2, which I think for a lot of teachers is really helpful to hear, is good enough is good enough. So the article talks about, sticking to basic lesson planning. Do a warm up, do a few short activities that help people get to their goal, and then do a wrap up. Use basic materials like a course book or a packet. Those flashy quizzes and online interactive stuff can look really cool, but it can add a lot more work for the teacher and the learners. Use basic presentation materials like PowerPoint, and then stick to basic assignments. People are going to get a lot of really good things out of those. It doesn't have to be fancy. So yeah, we'll send out the notes. Along with the notes, we will send out this link with CEUs afterwards, and I definitely recommend anyone who is either teaching synchronously or thinking about teaching synchronously to read this article. All right, that's all I have for that.
Thanks, Andrea. I think those are really, really good rules to keep in mind, especially since this is emergency teaching and not something we had originally planned for, right? Keep it simple. So our panelists this morning are Albee from the Adult Academic Program in Robbinsdale, Jessica Jones from Literacy Minnesota in St. Paul, Kylie Kunkel from Adult Basic Education Program in Moorhead, and Lindsey Cermak from Literacy Minnesota in Minneapolis. And we will be hearing from them in that order. We had sent out a list of questions for our panelists to consider as they planned what they were going to say this morning. And I'm not going to read those out loud to you because you can all read, but just keep in mind that these are the ideas that our panelists are trying to explain how it's working in their scenario. And they all have very different teaching contexts. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what's the same and what's different across those different contexts. Give everybody just a second to read through that, and then we're going to hear from Andy. All right, are we ready? I think we're ready. Andy, give me the thumbs up. All right, take it away, Andy.
Okay, there we are. So for those of you who may or may not know me, my name's Andy Albee. I teach mainly mathematics, but all of the GED prep, college prep, high school diploma, college, high school credit completion, all that stuff as part of a team at Adult Academic with Sarah Turnbull and Christine Kelly and John Trerotola. And so it's a thing for us to be able to kind of have our areas of expertise, but then also be able to work in the other areas as well. My normal work week prior to this COVID thing was 30 hours Monday through Thursday, with 20 hours of student contact within that. I'm actually pretty close to that, even now with the COVID-19 situation. I'm stretching it out and adjusting my times a little bit, but still hitting a lot of those same hourly time structures. So go ahead and go to the next slide. There it is.
Yep,
Okay.
there's just a small lag between when I click it and when it shows up. Sorry about that.
Yep, no, it's not a problem. We understand that. So I did a social studies group on Mondays and Wednesdays for an hour in the morning, a 1.5 hour daily math group Monday through Thursday. And then in the morning, while Christine or Sarah were doing English groups or science or STAR groups, I would be doing individual help with students, or maybe even just a couple of students together, small group work in the classroom. Did a lot of work on Edmentum and Edgenuity and Khan Academy, especially the Edgenuity for our students working on credit completion, and checking in with them, making sure that all of their tests are ready to go and all that stuff. And then, of course, just the class prep and staff meetings and all those things that take up our time during the week. Go ahead to the next slide. So our synchronous teaching now, I'm doing the 1.5 hour daily math group, but I went ahead and added a Friday in, since we're not having the students come in anyway. It just is an extra time for them to get one more chunk of math group in. And then I have a few students that either can't make it during that synchronous time or need extra help beyond what we're doing in the group. And so I'm setting up individual meetings through Zoom and through telephone calls to meet with them. Very similar to what I did with the individual work in the classroom. Still working on the distance learning programs that we had before. And now we just have a lot of webinars instead of the meetings and prep time. So go ahead. So then in our things that have worked, a lot of phone calls and text to students to check in. I'm using an app called the TextNow app. The nice thing is we'll see that a little bit later and I'll give a description of it. I forwarded my desk phone to my cell phone so that anybody that just calls into the school is going to come straight to my home phone without having to give out my home phone number. I've been emailing all the students and scheduling our Zoom meetings and sending out those emails with the Zoom meeting links in them so that I can make sure that all students know that we're available and have a chance to pop in. The big one for me is that second computer, and I'll show an example of that here in just a moment. So go ahead and click on to the next one. So in response to those objectives that they put out earlier, my students are still adapting to this blended classroom, but I'm sure everybody else is seeing this at home. And I put in that I love seeing my students' kids, but of course, kids can be a distraction as well. It's just a work in progress trying to get this all pulled together. I do have one of my students who her child is like, I want to take your math class. I don't want to do my math class. I'm going to sit in on yours. Students working on high school credit completion are still working mainly asynchronously. It's exactly the same as they were doing before. And then the trying to get the GED students to look at the materials prior to our synchronous time so that we can get the most out of that time together. My synchronous platform, I'd love to say that I'm getting students in. I'm getting 2, 3, 4 students at a time. So it's hard to do a small breakout room or have that student to student interaction because there's just not a lot of students there. But they are still getting that activity for those that are there. And then the Zoom with Smart Notebook, those are the main platforms I'm using. Go ahead and click to the next slide. But that ability to have the students see what they've normally seen. So here's an example of the TextNow app. This is a screenshot from my computer. The nice thing is this works on the computer, it works on your cell phone, works on anything that connects up to the internet. You can see my telephone number up there in the corner. I went ahead and blacked out all the students' telephone numbers since we don't have permission from them to share. But you can see that it makes records of the calls. So I can always go back and see, who I called on what day or what I texted them. That's a really nice thing for me to be able to keep track of. Wait a minute, did I contact them or not? It's just in the list here. It does have ads, but the ads are really small in the corner. I haven't had any problem with them at all. And you can send text just like you would from a cell phone with all of your emojis, photos, all that stuff. It still all works. Okay, go ahead and click. Okay, as far as contacting the students, I'm sending out emails to all students. And we had a meeting with our small group from AAP the other day, and I've kind of talked about that idea of being a little worried about, that I'm sending out all these emails and we all get so many emails from every place that it starts to look like junk. And just having students not get into the mode of me kind of nagging them. But with sending all that out every time, I have had 3 current students who were not engaged, who after a month of this got back a hold of me and said, yeah, I'd want to start working things back up again. And including going back and looking at some of our students that have dropped from the program maybe even 2, 3, 4 months ago, or even up to a year ago, and looking to ask them if they want to re-register because their circumstances may have changed, and being able to do things online may give them more of an option to continue in the program where they couldn't before. So go ahead and go to the next. So here's some of my equipment that I'm using. Our program has smart boards, and we have the doc cam. So I have the picture on the left there of the doc cam that I stole from my classroom. Okay, I didn't steal it, I borrowed it. It'll go back. But it's a nice little doc cam. So if you're working with somebody, you can snap a quick picture. But if you don't have a doc cam, just logging into the webinar, the Zoom meeting, whatever it is, with your cell phone can then give you an opportunity to be able to snap pictures as well. The big one for me has been my personal laptop that I use, which is a touchscreen laptop. And the nice thing is that when I have the touchscreen and I can use my pen that has the touchscreen little rubber thing on it, I can write on my computer exactly the same as I was writing on my smartboard at the schoolroom. The big benefit of that is that the students are getting the same experience at home seeing what's on the smartboard as what they were, so that you don't get the so that you get the same experience and they can see what would have been done in the classroom as well. Andrea put in there about making sure your cell phone's muted. I do that with the second computer as well. I just don't connect to the audio, and then I only have one audio stream coming. And then the last slide here, and this is a snapshot of a smart board thing that we did. It looks very, very, very busy. I understand that, but there's layers to this that we worked through this problem, from front to back. And so you're seeing the end slide that had multiple amounts of work in it. And this was just a spot we were talking about area. And I said, well, what if I had to put new flooring into my house? So for those of you who need to come in and steal something from my house, you now have a floor plan of what my house looks like. But being able to come up with those real world applications, not just here's a problem out of a book, but here's how we find the area of the entire thing. So I think that is the end of my slides. Yeah, any questions anybody has?
We have
You're
a
very
few
welcome,
minutes.
Stephanie.
We have a few minutes, and you can either raise your hand to be called on verbally, or you can drop your questions in the text chat. Okay,
and I do see a question from Diane on the doc cam. The doc cam that I have, and it's an IPEVO V4K is the unit that we have. It is a USB based doc cam, and it just plugs straight into your USB. And so when you click on that share video at the bottom corner of your Zoom, it'll give you the option of your computer camera or the doc cam. So you can just do it straight in through that. I've also plugged it into my second computer and then been able to take pictures and put them straight into the smart notebook software. Have you managed sharing videos with students? Can they hear them? Yes, when you do the share screen at the bottom, there is a small option on there for share computer audio. So it takes your headphones and your microphone off and just starts taking the audio straight from the machine, and that is nice. Yeah. Behind me, so Christine talking about that, I was scheduled to go to Philmont Scout Ranch in June with my scout troop this year, and unfortunately we've been canceled, so this may be as close to New Mexico as I get, but this is where I was supposed to be in June. So yeah, I'm kind of bummed too. We are getting the chance to put in and maybe be able to go later in the summer, but we'll see what happens. So
And
Yes.
it looks like
Yes.
Marisa shared that .cam video or model in the text chat if anybody's looking for
Correct.
that.
Correct. And our school just bought them for all the classrooms. They're not overly expensive. They're actually a little bit cheaper than most of the other ones. And from Angela, yes, I do use the Zoom platform. I like it better than the Google Hangouts platform, and it's worked well for me. So.
Any other questions for Andy?
Yeah, Angela, if your district only allows Google Meet, then that's what you use. That's what the district allows you to use. It's not like one is fantastic and the other one is horrible. They're just different. Thanks, everybody. It was a pleasure to be on here, and I'm going to sit on and listen to everybody else because you got some great presenters coming after me.
Thanks so much, Andy.
Yeah, have a great morning, everybody, and we'll continue the thing.
And to Angela, who's talking about her district only allows Google Meet, actually that's true of one of our presenters who's coming up later in the session. So you'll get to hear and see some examples of Google Meet too. So on to Jessica.
Good morning, everybody. All right, so my name's Jessica Jones. I work for Literacy Minnesota, formerly known as Minnesota Literacy Council. And I teach a really multi-level class. It includes high intermediate up to sort of very early GED prep or sort of pre-beginning, but all students who are ESL learners. So just before this happened, we were in the process of kind of splitting that class up into 2 classes, and now it's in the virtual world, I'm back to teaching that whole range. So before this happened, I worked about 36 hours a week, a really standard sort of daytime Monday through Friday schedule, and I had 20 hours of FaceTime with my students. It was a intensive English course with a math component as well. And, now I have 2 small kids at home and a third neighbor child who comes over for our homeschooling or school at home lessons. And so I've really had to change up the way my work life looks. I generally work with my kids all morning, helping them get their schoolwork done. And then after lunch, they work on screens independently while I log on to do work with students, my students. And then we're very lucky to have neighbors who help kind of reciprocate with childcare in the afternoon. But so now I'm only doing about 3 to 6 hours of synchronous time with my students a week. And I'll talk about what that looks like. And then trying to tie that in with, anywhere from 8 to 10 hours of asynchronous work that, students opt into as they have time. Because as I'm working with my students and surveying them about what technology they have and how much time they have right now, there's a huge range. I have some students who say, I can put in about 3 hours a week right now, just enough to stay connected and practice my English a little bit. And I have other students who, don't have kids, don't have jobs, and they would love to be putting in 15 to 20 hours every week because they have time and they're bored. So go ahead and advance to the next slide, Susan. I'll talk about a little bit about what my class looks like right now. All right, so currently I'm doing scheduled Zoom calls 3 times a week for an hour. And I've added Saturdays to as a work day for me, because that's a day when my husband's not working, so he can be with the kids, and I spend more time working on Saturdays now. And so one of those calls is on a Saturday morning, and the other 2 are on weekday afternoons. And I've really focused those calls on small group speaking practice. Now, when I do a Zoom call, I have on average anywhere from 12 to 15 participants. So as I started experimenting with this, it became abundantly clear that I couldn't provide a lot of meaningful instruction for that many students because we just couldn't do much interaction. It was hard for me to, even if I was posing questions to them, it was hard for me to manage turning their microphones on and off and having them do that. And so pretty quickly I said, well, I had volunteers emailing me, people who had previously worked in my classroom saying, you know, do you need us? Is there anything we can do? We want to support you. And so I said, okay, I think I've got a plan here. And so we now use the breakout rooms to facilitate a lot of student-to-student interaction during those calls. And then the volunteers help provide the feedback that students really want about their speaking. They want to keep practicing, and that's, to me, probably the most important thing. With everybody staying at home, they have even fewer opportunities to practice using English than they did before. But they also really want feedback. They want to know how they can improve their word choice and their grammar and their pronunciation. So I'll talk in more detail in just a minute about what those Zoom calls look like. I also do a little bit of Zoom tutoring each week, one-on-one for those students who do want to be putting in more time and are doing a lot of work on our asynchronous platforms, which are MobyMax and Read Theory. And those are two platforms that my students had been using even before the stay-home order. So we had been using those as a supplement to our in-class work. And so now we've just kind of ramped up what we're doing with those. And then the other way that we use the Zoom calls is to introduce writing assignments. So I do give writing assignments, not a lot, maybe about 2 or 3 a month. And I use the synchronous time to introduce the topic and have them practice talking about the topic, and for me to walk through the expectations on the writing assignment. And then after that, everything happens asynchronously, and they complete the writing assignment and they submit it to me however they can. So right now it's a little busy because it includes, like, some send them by email, some send them as a Google Doc, some people write it in their notebook and take a photo. I'm still working on how to provide feedback in all those different platforms, but I'm really encouraged by the level of participation from the students. And then the final component, just like Andy, I'm doing a lot of text message check-ins with students around their goals, doing some small surveys. I send announcement videos every week or two just to kind of show them new things we've added to our class website. So it's ever evolving, and I didn't start with all these components at once, but it's growing, and we're seeing really great participation. So that's just super rewarding. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. So what I want to spend most of the time talking about is our small group speaking activity, because this is the thing that I think is probably most replicable. And I do these, I set them up on a PowerPoint slideshow, and then basically when I'm ready to do the next one, I just alter the conversation questions and the warm-up activity. And so it has really cut down my prep time, because when I first started doing this, I was easily spending twice the amount of time in prep that I was spending in real time with students. So I've at least gotten that down so that the prep takes less time than the actual instruction. All right, so we do a little warm-up activity. This week we were working on some questions that use past tense. So I had students just review for themselves the past tense form of these verbs, and then after everybody's done it in their notebook, I type those in on the slide. And this activity is to get the students ready, but it also serves a really practical purpose, which is at the beginning of the call, I'm busy letting people in and making sure that their sound works and greeting them and making sure that the name that appears on their slide is the name they want to be called, because the volunteers really appreciate having that. They can't remember everybody's name because there's like 30 some students on the roster. And then occasionally I'll do a tech tip, things about like how to mute your own audio, or how to flip your phone from this way to this way so that you can see the whole slide more clearly. And then I often do a quick grammar or vocabulary point. So maybe introduce a couple new vocabulary words that are going to appear in the conversation questions. And then finally, we do the conversation questions by dictation. And that is one, so students get that practice with writing and spelling and listening. But it's also very practical, because once they get into their small groups, they can't see my slideshow anymore, which means they can't see the conversation questions anymore. So I use the dictation to help give them the conversation questions so that when they're in their small groups, everybody has them in their notebook already. And a really great tech tip that I figured out is how to create text boxes in your slideshow that you can type in while you're presenting a slideshow. And if you're interested in that, you want to Google PowerPoint text box ActiveX control, and there's lots of tutorials out there on how to do it. Once you get it set up, it's really easy, and then you can just cut and paste that same text box into future presentations. All right, let's look at the next slide. So once students have their conversation questions in their notebook, then we use the breakout groups feature of Zoom. And I put one volunteer in a breakout room with 2 to 4 students. And that usually lasts about 20 minutes. And in those groups, we have a really structured speaking format that we use, and we use it for every single lesson that we do. And that is that someone first chooses one of those questions and answers them. And then someone else in the group volunteers to summarize what that person just said. And then finally, the other 1 to 3 people in the group ask follow-up questions to the first person. So it's their job to really listen to what someone else says, and then ask them for more information about that. And the volunteers help provide support with this format. This is something that we were doing as a regular activity in the classroom. So a lot of my students already had started to develop these skills of summarizing and follow-up questions. That definitely made it easier to translate this to an online activity. But I think that anybody could, with a little bit of practice, start to do that.
Great. And Jessica, this 2-minute warning for your presentation, and then someone was wondering if there are 2 volunteers in the conversation group.
Yeah, so there are, when we break up into the small groups, there's 1 volunteer per group. So that means when I have an average class of 12 to 15, I have 4 volunteers who log on to each class. And so they're there from the very beginning, and then when we get into small groups, there are enough volunteers to facilitate each group. Although I have found that when I don't have that many volunteers, I can put some of my higher level students into a group by themselves, and they can facilitate this mostly on their own. And then the nice thing about Zoom is it allows me as the host to jump back and forth into each group. So I can kind of walk around like I did in my classroom and observe each group. And then finally, we come back together at the end for the last 5 to 10 minutes, and we do kind of a plenary session where people share out something they heard from someone else in their group. Oops, sorry. They share out something they heard from someone else in their group, and then we wrap it up from there. And I think that's it for me. So if there are questions, I'll try to kind of keep an eye on the chat box here. Yeah, I see Christine's comment that this works for all levels of students. It really, it's something that I have been sharing in presentations for the past year as an in-class activity. And it's the one that I hear back from participants afterwards, and they say, how successful it was in their classrooms and how quickly they were able to get it up and running. And it really helps facilitate student-to-student interaction. I think a bonus has been, as we've switched to this online platform, because of the clearly defined rules and turn-taking structure, it works really well in a video chat because it helps to minimize students talking over each other and their audio interfering with one another. Great. Good, yeah. My goal for this group, again, is just for them to spend their synchronous time really interacting with each other and building community, because I feel like that community building aspect then carries over to the asynchronous work we want to do and keeping students engaged for the long term. Because that's one of my big concerns, is how am I going to keep students engaged with this work for, you know, many months potentially.
And I like the use of sentence frames too, because it scaffolds up for those who don't necessarily have as much speaking ability, but they can still contribute.
Yeah, good. So somebody asked, what kind of questions do you use for the conversation questions? I have lists and lists of questions that I developed for this activity. For example, last week we talked about the place where you grew up. And so we asked students to talk about where they grew up and what things they liked about it, what was their typical day like when they were 10 years old, what kinds of chores or responsibilities did they have as kids growing up, what was their school like when they were growing up. So questions that are rich and have a lot of opportunities for storytelling and for asking those follow-up question kind of details.
Yeah, and Jessica, there is a question from Mike. Is there a way for students to see the questions in the group? Do they have to write down the questions that you said?
Yeah, so far I have not discovered a way to do that. I think, you know, one thing I may play around with now that I have enough volunteers is I could give the questions to the volunteers ahead of time, and they, with co-host permissions, they would be able to share them on the screen with the students. But if it's a group of just students and you don't have a sort of co-host who you've shared things with ahead of time, then that's not really an option. Yes, I do have a paid Zoom account because 40 minutes just wasn't enough time to allow people to get in and get settled and get through an activity. And Padlet's an interesting idea. I haven't used that. I find that, so almost all my students are accessing Zoom on their phones, and they're not all tech savvy enough to sort of work with multiple windows. And so yeah. I really don't want to start sending them out of Zoom for additional resources, because we're trying to kind of keep everybody in a space where they don't have to do a lot of, the cognitive tech load is not very high, right? We'll keep the focus on the language learning.
I think if you had a setup where you had done a Chromebook distribution or something from your site and you knew that everybody had that kind of a device, you might be more able to do multiple apps. But you're right, I think, Jessica, if they're on their phones, it's harder to switch between apps on your phone than it is on a computer. Mm-hmm.
And also the text size on a phone, even projecting 3 questions, if they're long questions, the text size gets fairly small. So that's why having it in their notebooks is really nice. And I think, you know, for higher level students, they really like that dictation practice anyway. And I know other teachers are doing other types of dictation, even at lower levels. So it's an interesting idea to sort of get more mileage out of your dictation by also turning it into a conversation activity.
Yeah. Okay, I think Andrea is telling us we are at time, so it is time to move on to our next
All right.
panelist. Thanks so
Thanks,
much,
everybody.
Jessica. So next we are going to hear from Kylie in Moorhead. Take it away, Kylie.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kylie Kunkel, and I'm a beginning ESL teacher in Moorhead. I have been a beginning ESL teacher for about 3.5 years. My students are low beginning to high beginning and are at CASAS levels 1 through 3. Before the pandemic, I was teaching an evening class on Monday and Wednesday from 5:30 to 8:30. And now I am teaching a class still on Monday and Wednesday evenings, but I have switched to an hour and a half, just 6 to 7:30 p.m. Throughout the switch to online instruction, I have been able to engage most of my students and I've had almost near perfect attendance. And I just want to say that I do have a very supportive team here in Moorhead. So a big thanks to my manager, my co-teachers, and my paraprofessional, Stephanie, who consistently give me support and inspiration. On the next slide, this is just a photo of my students and a writing assignment that we did before the pandemic. My class is mostly made up of Somali and Arabic speakers. If we go to the next slide, our district is using Google Meet to provide all of our distance learning instruction. We have not been approved to use any other platforms at this time, such as Zoom or WhatsApp. Google Meet can be accessed online, or there's an app that students can download on their phone. I would say most of my students do use their phone and use the app to attend class without any issues, other than sometimes they say the text is a little bit small on their screen. If they have trouble seeing the text, I just reassure them and tell them it's okay, you can just listen to this part of class. The district has also given each teacher a Google Voice phone number, which protects our personal privacy. And this allows teachers to call or text our students without sharing our personal phone number. And it's a great way to stay in communication with our students while we're working from home. If we go to the next slide. So how did I set up a successful distance learning class? When we learned that schools were going to be shut down and we would have to start distance learning, I was very nervous about my students being able to join because most of them do have pretty low basic computer skills. So I quickly discovered that it was important for all of my students to have working emails. So I called each of my students, and if they had an email, that was great. And if they didn't have an email, I helped them create a Gmail account. Once I had correct email addresses, I set up a Google meeting and sent that invitation to their email. And then I would call each of my students and walk them through the steps of how to join the Google Meet. These calls would often take 20 to 30 minutes, and oftentimes my students would have family members helping them out. But this really worked. They were able to join the meeting while they were on the phone with me. We could have some one-on-one time on the platform, and I could kind of show them how it worked. I believe these steps of calling and walking my students through the steps of how to get onto the Google meeting was a huge factor in my success of my attendance. The students were not expected to learn how to use the platform on their own, and they felt more confident once they had gotten onto the platform at least once. So if you are having trouble getting your students to participate in your distance learning classes, I highly recommend this method of walking them through the steps of how to join the platform. It was a little bit time consuming, but in my eyes, it was well worth it. You want to go to the next one? At the beginning of each of my distance learning classes, I review how the Google Meet platform works, and we review some etiquette of distance learning. I remind students that if they're not talking or being asked to share, that they keep their microphone muted so that we're not getting too much noise or feedback in the background. We practice this skill many times each class, and after about 3 weeks, I would say most of my students have finally mastered that skill, which makes our class run so much smoother. We also discussed that if their camera is on, we can see everything that's going on in their house or in their background. So I just want them to be mindful about that. To help my students learn how to use Google Meet and all the buttons on there, I use these large icons of the buttons. Pictures are so helpful for beginning ESL students. So these pictures have helped me tremendously. Just remember to be patient with your students and yourself while you're learning how to use a distance learning platform. Repetition and practice will help your students master these skills. And I've cited the website where I found these icons in my resources page if you want to use them in your classroom. The next slide. One of my favorite sayings is that we all smile in the same language. If you would join one of my Google meetings at the beginning of it, you would see all of my students smiling at each other. They're happy to be checking in with each other and seeing if anybody needs anything. So we usually take about the first 10 minutes of class just to greet each other and check in. Sometimes I'll also highlight resources that are available in our community. I believe creating a classroom community where my students know each other and feel welcome is just as important as the curriculum we are learning. I also believe that routines are very important for a beginning ESL classroom, which is why I've kept many of my classroom routines and transferred them to my distance learning Google Meet classes. I am providing synchronous instruction to an average of 10 to 12 students each class. I try my best to provide my students many opportunities to participate and be an active part of our class by using multiple modalities. We incorporate speaking, listening, writing, and movement in each class. I continue to try to reduce my teacher talk and provide a safe environment for all of my students to learn and practice their skills. The next slide is kind of what my typical distance learning class looks like. After we check in and say hello to each other, we move on to our calendar and weather question routine. And this was a routine that I had in my classroom for about the last year. So I use a slideshow and I present the questions. My students take turns reading the question and providing the answer. Then we move on to dictation. Dictation was another classroom routine that I had. And I do it in a very similar manner to what I did in the classroom. I ask my students to grab a piece of paper and a pencil, and I dictate the words or the sentences, and they write them. Sometimes after we're finished with dictations, my students like to hold it up to the camera and show me so I can do a quick check of their dictation. And then we've started doing a self-check together. I will call on a student, I will ask them to read the word or the sentence, and then they spell it. And while they spell it, I write it on a whiteboard, and then I hold my whiteboard up to the camera, and all of the students can check their dictation in that way. My students really love dictation, and they take a lot of pride in it. And it's really a great activity because they are getting listening, writing, spelling, and alphabet practice all in this one activity that they all love and enjoy. Then we move on to a question or a picture of the day, and this is just to get them speaking English, practicing their English. I don't correct them during this time. I allow them all to speak. They all have a chance to speak. And I usually use either a picture prompt or a sentence frame to get them to start their speaking. And then we move on to kind of our reading, grammar, phonics, sight word part of our class. We've been using the What's Next Sam, Sam, and Adams stories from New Readers Press in my classroom for about a year, and all my students really enjoyed these stories. So that was another routine that I took from my classroom and I just transferred it to distance learning. I do a little pre-teaching. I usually have a slideshow where I'll present some new vocabulary. First, we'll practice the grammar and sight words, and then we jump into reading.
Kylie, about 2 more minutes.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Usually I read the story one or 2 times, and then the students will take turns reading it, or we'll do choral reading. And it's been really fun. If a student's having trouble pronouncing a word, oftentimes another student will unmute and jump in and help them, which I really love seeing. They're taking ownership and they're helping each other out. And then I've started doing a comprehension check with our comprehension questions from our Sam, Sam, and Adams story. And I ask all of my students to turn on their camera so I can see them. And I'll ask them yes, no questions. And they'll give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Thumbs up for yes or thumbs down for no, which is a lot of fun. It allows all of my students to be active in the comprehension questions, and it allows me to do a quick formative assessment. So I've really enjoyed adding this piece to my distance learning. On the next slide, you can see that I do use the US Postal Service to send out paper copies of my stories and my dictation to my students. During the first week, all of my students overwhelmingly wanted paper copies. So every 2 to 3 weeks, I send out the materials that we're working on, and I usually try to include a small handwritten note. Everybody likes getting handwritten mail, and I want my students to know that I truly value them, and I'm happy that they've decided to be a part of our distance learning class. I also usually give my students just a little bit of homework. I ask them to read their story to a family member or a friend at least 2 or 3 times before our next class. And then I assign some of the writing portions of our Sam, Sam, and Adam story for them to do as homework. And on my last slide, although transitioning to an online platform has been a challenge, it's been very rewarding for both me and my students. We've all been able to learn new technology skills that we probably wouldn't have taken the time to learn before. And we're also able to stay connected in a time when many are feeling lonely and isolated. I truly look forward to my classes on Monday and Wednesday night. And the way my students continue to participate and attend my class, I feel that they really enjoy the class as well. I wish you all continued success with your distance learning, and remember, don't give up. Keep trying to connect and do your best, and you will have success as well. Thank you for allowing me to share. And here's, on the next slide, is my resources if you want those icon cards.
Thanks. So we have some time for questions. And could you just repeat, Kylie, the stories you're using for the reading?
Sure. We've been using the What's Next Sam, Sam, and Adam stories from New Readers Press. And I find those are really good for beginning ESL. They're multi-level stories. It's a continuum of stories, you know, same characters, and you get a lot of phonics, sight word practice in those stories.
So I don't know if you're going to be able to go back and see, Kylie, but there were a lot of people talking about what amazing work you were doing, including Patsy. See if I can find that her exact quote. But a lot of people thanking you for the routines you're sharing, and then Patsy said, so impressive, we can make this profound instructional pivot at this low level of literacy English if we create good scaffolds and persist, as Kylie is demonstrating. Not easy, but doable.
Thank you. It's been fun. It's been a challenge, but it's been a lot of fun. And the students really make it all worth it, as you all know as teachers.
All right, well, if anybody, oh, and there's a question about, can we get a recorded copy of this Zoom? And yes, we are recording. This will be recorded and we'll share the link out.
And we'll be sending, these are Google Slides, and we'll be sending a link to the Google Slides that'll have all the active links in it too. All right, so we have one more panelist to hear from, and that's Lindsey. So go ahead, Lindsey.
Hello, everyone. I am Lindsey Cermak, and I work with Literacy Minnesota. I'm teaching at a site in Minneapolis, or I was. I'm a GED instructor, and even before the stay-at-home order, I was already wanting to transition my class to be more of a pre-GED skills-based class just because of the population of the students that I was serving. And so this actually has allowed me to start making that transition and make it more seamless than I was anticipating. So before I was teaching about 14 hours, and now I have 6 hours of synchronous teaching time, and I have some things in the works with asynchronous learning, but that is definitely still in progress. So if you want to go to the next slide. The way I started setting up my classes was with my current students. We were already communicating through Google Voice pretty regularly. And so I was able to contact students that way. And I had some students who just wanted to kind of keep studying on their own. They weren't really interested in doing online classes. And then I did have a handful of students who wanted to do online classes, and they were like, yes, please start this. So I ended up doing some individual phone calls to help students get set up on Schoology and Zoom. Those are the two platforms I've been using. And then, so I had 1 student to 3 students, maybe 4 students each class period. And then we have other sites at our open door locations, but they are volunteer led. And so there weren't online teaching opportunities for them at the moment. And so I opened up my class to others of our sites. And so now my roster has grown to about 15 students. And these are students that are interested in wanting to learn because they've said yes. And so, or wanting to do this online, I should say. And so that has increased my attendance per class. So now I have about 7 to 9 students coming regularly. And it has then forced me to develop a kind of mini orientation and introductory Zoom call, because I was accepting students in my class that didn't know me, had never seen me before. And so with the coordinator of that site, we set up a meeting with the student as kind of like a handoff so that there was a familiar face. I created some slides. We walked through kind of what the class is about, and then we did it on Zoom. So they were already set up with Zoom, and they get set up with Schoology as well before that call. So that's also kind of a nice way of getting them used to the technology before they enter the class. If you want to go to the next slide. So my class schedule, I do class 3 days a week, and I have a reading and writing class for an hour, and then we take a break, and then we come back and do a math conversations class for an hour. And if you go to the next slide, I have some people that go to both, and then I also have some, because of schedules or interest, they are just doing one or the other. But this is a slide from my, oh, it has animations. I'm sorry, because I copied it. If you can, yeah, sorry about that. This is a copy of the slide from my orientation that I do. And I just let students know, like right now in our reading and writing class, we're talking about summarizing paragraphs. And the skills we focus on in this class are just to help make us better readers and writers for whatever subject we're studying. Again, trying to transition away from the specific GED class. And then the homework assignments, the Schoology is what we're using for that. To give them practice with writing and typing complete sentences, and then I can give feedback, doing vocabulary exercises. And so that's a way that I'm trying to address that and give them writing practice. There have been a handful of students that have done these assignments and submitted them. And then some students just, I think, are less comfortable, but definitely something that I want to keep trying. And if you go to the next slide, this is the first book, this 21st Century Reading Skills book. That is the text that I'm using right now for our reading and the article that I chose for practicing summarizing paragraphs. High interest, current articles. I also want to start using this reading and vocabulary series that I got as well recently, right before the stay-at-home order. So those are the texts I'm using. And then what I'm doing is I have created Google Slides. So on the right-hand side, this is how I have been approaching it. Zoom calls, I create Google Slides for each class. And now that I have my routine, it's easy for me to just plug new content in or a new paragraph in. So I've actually typed out the paragraph so that it's bigger on the screen. And we're just looking at one paragraph at a time when we're summarizing. They have access to the full article on Schoology, but doing it with slides has helped me a lot, and I feel like it gives structure to the class. We're able to easily post learning targets. I do that every time, and we annotate, they circle things, so we use that function as well. And now I'm starting to introduce the chat. So we are chatting to try to get more participation as well. The next slide, my math conversations class, I purposely called it math conversations because people are at such different levels. And so what I am doing is I am choosing, I'm trying to choose high interest, engaging prompts that then we are talking about, trying to make connections between numbers, what they mean, seeing it from different angles, different ways of solving, and then encouraging students to work on their own through resources that I have posted on my class website, or request to work with a tutor, because I have volunteers available that would like to work with students one-on-one, and some students have taken me up on it. So then they're able to keep going on their own, in their own math journey, since everyone is at a different level. So trying to address that with such a multi-level group. If you want to click, maybe one more time, again, sorry, this was copied from my orientation. And then, so these are two websites that I have chosen to use prompts from. So Chewable Math, it's interesting, engaging. We've done so much math around nutrition labels and percent changes and, you know, best deals and different things. And students are coming up with questions to ask, and then we're solving them. And then also Splat, which many people may have been made aware of just with different presentations, or maybe you've seen it on your own. I've used the fraction ones where you see that, okay, 7 is the total, and part of the 7 that is there is covered up, how much is underneath. And so that gets people talking about, well, how would you figure that out? These are fractions, that is missing. And I do it the same way with Zoom and Google Slides. And most students are using their phones, and for the most part, it has worked just fine to use Zoom on their phones. If you go to the next slide.
And Lindsay, you have about 2 more minutes before we want to go to questions.
Perfect. Then
sorry about that. I had actually clicked the link instead of just advancing the slide.
No worries. So I kind of already talked about this, just a visual of how I'm trying to help engage students outside of the synchronous class time. So you can go to the next slide. I have created a class website where I have posted a lot of resources for students, specifically study resources and that they can choose from, whether it's reading or grammar or math, to keep studying on their own. So you can go to the next slide. And then you can, that's a picture of my website, and then you can actually go to the next one. So now that I've been in this for a few weeks, the things that I am thinking about that I want to do next, Zoom check-ins with my students. I'm going to be doing that next week. I created a Google form that they could fill out their time preferences. And so they're filling that out. It's on my website. And then I want to have like a half-an-hour conference with each student. And so prior to their meeting, I'm going to send them another Google form that they will answer some questions about what they feel is going well, what challenges, other specific questions, just to prepare and help them prepare for that meeting. So kind of like like a virtual, it's not a graphic organizer, but like a virtual graphic organizer in preparation for our meeting, so that they come with things already thought through. And then I want to be able to use breakout rooms because my class size is growing and I have more levels because the class has grown. Maybe I'll do 2 separate math classes. I also have in the back of my mind, I want to enhance my Schoology course when I get the time. So just things that I want to do to improve, because these things will carry over into in-person. And if you go to the next slide, I also want to record our classes for students who missed. And so I've created Loom videos, which are incredibly easy. And I was very intimidated at first. So easy, a click of a button, I'm able to walk through a consent and release form, explain it one time instead of 15, and then just send that link to students to watch. And then the second clip, I just show them then, how will I sign this electronically? So it's great for how-tos if you don't want to keep repeating yourself, and the link stays. And the last slide I have is just lessons I've learned so far. And so I was skeptical about this at first, but I can do this. I've learned my students can do this. I've learned flexibility is huge, and I need to remember that for myself and for my students. Time, and everybody has so many things going on. I need to empower my students and not coddle them. I need to have expectations of them. If they do miss class and they want to keep participating, I want them to look at our website to see what we've worked on. And the next one, everything that I'm doing right now is only going to make us stronger in the future. And yeah, necessity has basically pushed me into where I should have already been already. So, and it has also, the thing that I'm thinking about too is students just need better access to internet and computers. Phones are okay and they work, but you can only do so much. And so just thinking about that and how do we address that issue. So that's all I got.
That was wonderful. We have some time for questions if anyone has any specific questions for Lindsey. Hashtag flexibility. Yeah, Lindsey, there were some questions happening during your presentation about copyright. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
You know, I don't. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up because I need to think about that. No, I'm reading through the comments now.
Yeah, and Lindsey, there's a question about loving the idea of an orientation as having new students enter in your class. And how is registration and orientation at your site working right now?
Yeah, so we're not accepting currently until things kind of settle. I'm not accepting students that have never been a part of our Literacy Minnesota classes. So the registration isn't needing to happen. But the orientation, I basically created a Google spreadsheet and I had the coordinators that that know the students from the other sites. They signed up for a time, they coordinated with that learner. They signed up for a time to meet, and then I sent them a Zoom invite, and then I shared my screen, and it was like 15 minutes, 20-minute conversation to just go through and give them a chance to meet me and hear about the class. So, and you can do it multiple. It's nice if students sign up in bulk, but I tried to make it available for people's schedules. So there were times that I did have 2 students at one time instead of doing them individually, but a lot of times they've been individual.
So there is a question from Leah about how long are your synchronous classes in Zoom? And actually that was a question that came up from someone else prior to the session. Just curious about what people are finding is sort of a good length of time on average for a synchronous online class to be held. So I think maybe we'll ask Lindsey how long hers are and then throw it out to all the panelists. What length of time feels good for your class?
An hour has been just fine. By the time people sign on and we get started, it's probably more like 45 minutes. But it doesn't seem too long. So we're still able to get things done. So I would say an hour for both the math and then separately an hour for the reading, not back to back.
And any of our other panelists, what length of time is feeling good for your online classes?
I've been doing an hour-and-a-half class, and my class is in the evening, so that seems to work well. It's a good time for my students to come, and an hour-and-a-half seems about the right amount of time.
And it looks like Jessica put in the text chat that hers are 1 to 1.5 hours also. How about you, Andy? How long are yours? An hour? Hour and a half?
Looks like 1.5 for math groups, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that feels about right to me too from my experience with professional development webinars. After about an hour and a half, you start to kind of lose people. Oh, and Shana asked, how many times per week?
I'm doing 3 times per week.
I think that's what Jessica said hers were as well. Kylie's are twice. And Lindsay asked a question, can you password protect your Google site that would take care of many copyright and privacy issues? I think you can, but it might require everybody to have a Google account so that they could log in. So you could restrict certain sections to only verified specific users, right? Just like you can with a Google Doc. You can share it with specific people, or you can make it public. You can do that with your Google site as well. So if everybody had a Google account, you could share certain sections of your page with just those people.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
And yes, that would protect you in a lot of ways in terms of copyright issues, because if it's closed, it's not republished, and then you have a lot more flexibility as a teacher to post things.
Right. Yeah, with mine on the math groups, I would do an hour and a half normally when we were together anyway. But the nice thing with the hour and a half here is there's inevitably going to be the kid crying in the background, or Johnny pushed me and mommy's got to go take care of Johnny and Susie, whatever, right? So, you know, it gives us a little bit of time to have some downtime as one or more of the students goes and takes care of whatever is happening at the house.
So it looks like Angela has her hand up. We'll see if Marisa or Gail can unmute Angela. She'd like to ask a question.
I did have my hand up and then I put it down and it didn't work. We're using the Google platform in Rochester, and we have assigned all of our students Google accounts. And I had posted earlier, we have amazing people that are doing intake screening with every student, calling everybody, and they introduce them to Google, show them their passwords and walk through it. And it's not 100% foolproof. We still have people with questions when we get them in class, but it helps a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that orientation is really key for getting people set up and ready to be able to access the class. Yeah. Like how to actually get your Google account working. Mm-hmm. Oh, nice comment here from Jessica that she's kind of thinking of her course as an a la carte menu at the moment. My primary goal is increasing participation, so I let students know that it's okay to attend when they can. If they don't log on for a week, it's still great to come back.
All right, and I know we still have some information to hear from Susan about different platforms.
Yeah, not a lot. I just wanted to call out a few of the features that that some of our panelists talked about that maybe people haven't thought about using in their Google or other live meeting platforms. So live captioning is a really important one, I think. Most webinar platforms have the option for live captions. So Google Meet, Skype, Microsoft Teams, Zoom Rooms, they all can do live captioning. And even if your particular platform doesn't have it, if you use Google Slides has live captions. So if I go down here on my Google Slide bar, I can actually turn captioning on right here. And it will automatically caption as I speak. So that is a really helpful tool to support learners who have difficult hearing or noisy environments. Like Andy was saying, you know, there's kids crying in the background, kids fighting in the background, dogs barking, the trash collection comes by and starts beeping, right? There's a lot of noise. And so having the captioning could be a support for people to be able to follow along better, even if it's really noisy in their background. And it is also a good support for language learners who can then get the text as well as the audio. And I'm actually going to turn that off because I don't think we need it right now. But as Marisa says, very important to enunciate clearly when using captioning and not speak too quickly, because it can only keep up so fast. And if you aren't enunciating well, the captions will be wrong, and then that will actually create more confusion. And then another thing to think about is annotation or writing and drawing tools. A lot of webinar platforms have that option too. So kind of like what Andy was talking about with his smart notebook, where he can annotate and draw on the slide and things. Zoom has this option within within the platform to be able to annotate on a slide, and some other platforms have that as well. I think Skype has an option for a pen, right? And so thinking about ways to interact with the content on the screen through that is also something to consider.
Yeah, the Zoom has a whiteboard space on it as well. It's the Smart Notebook for me is a little bit nicer because that's what the students were already used to, but
yep.
It does have that option as well.
Yep. Or if you don't have Smart Notebook, right? What are your other options?
Exactly.
And Microsoft Teams has, I think, a whiteboard too. So there's a lot of different tools out there that allow you to do things like that. And there are even just browser-based whiteboard apps that you could bring up and interact with students on as well. So there's a lot of ways to increase the interaction with the content on the screen as well as the audio content. So now we have a little bit of time for people to share and ask questions from the group. So we've heard from our 4 panelists about what instructional strategies they're using in their synchronous and asynchronous, how they're making those two things blend together to create a class that works for their students and increase engagement. What are some things that the rest of you folks are doing? What would you like to share about what's working for your students? So you can feel free to drop those in the text chat or raise your hand or unmute and share out loud. Andrea, do you want to talk a little bit about your idea about voice quality settings for pronunciation?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I've done work with voice quality settings, which are the movement of the tongue, lips, jaw, kind of everything that works together. And usually when I do it in classes, we use handheld mirrors so learners can watch my mouth and then watch their own mouths and try to make their mouths move similarly to be able to produce the different sounds that we use in English. Also helps a lot for enunciation. And as Jessica said, it's that idea of having a big American mouth is really helpful when you're in a Zoom call or tutoring online. And if you're in a Zoom call, you don't need a mirror. Learners can just watch your mouth as you're talking and then watch themselves as they repeat it back.
Neat. And then Carol shared about Google Jamboard, which is something of a whiteboard for Google Meet. I'm not familiar with that one. I might have to check that one out. And I put in a link for BitPaper, which is not a free platform, but it is it's a whiteboard tool for sharing collaborative online writing space. And one of the neat things about it is that you can do audio or video chat through BitPaper. So you can use it for synchronous meeting and be working collaboratively with other people on your whiteboard at the same time as you're talking with them on the sidebar. So it's a pretty neat way to share screens and content and talk at the same time. And it's really been popular among math teachers in K-12 and higher education because you can put a grid on your whiteboard, and so it makes it really nice for doing different kinds of graphing and things like that. Anybody else? What have you been using? What have you been trying? Angela, yeah.
Maybe this is kind of common practice and everybody does it, but we have, as I said, the Google platform that we're using. And I will create a Google Slides presentation that I will give each of my students their own copy of that presentation. Then all of their homework is done right on that presentation. So I'll do a slide where I'm presenting the information and then I'll ask a question and they individually on their own copies type the answers, and then we turn it in the end.
What a great idea. And I see starting class with some deep breathing, because stress reduction, which we all could use right now. And then Mike, I see there are so many different tools and platforms, and it's very easy to feel overwhelmed by all the options. Definitely referring back to that article we mentioned at the beginning, that we don't have to be doing all the things. What matters is that we're doing something.
Yep. Pick one or two things and get good at them. Jane has a question. One of the presenters mentioned movement. How do you do that online? I think that was Kylie.
Yes, that was me. Sorry, I was trying to get unmuted. I was kind of referring to our comprehension checks when I'm asking them to do thumbs up, thumbs down. And I've thought about doing some brain breaks. I haven't tried it yet, but that is something I might start trying, just doing a little brain break in the middle of my class, get my students to even stand up or walk around a little bit. So I'm thinking of trying that.
And actually, I was on a call earlier this week with another teacher, and he was talking about how he actually did get his students to get up and go find an object and bring it back and show it on screen so that it could move, and also one where they had to go ask somebody else in the house. They were practicing present progressive tense, and so it was a question of, okay, what are you doing? And they had to go ask other people in their house what they were doing and then come back and report. So that was another way he used movement in his class. And I think we're just about at time. Andrea is giving us the 5-minute warning. So we'll have a few minutes for Patsy to share about upcoming opportunities for more professional development.
Great, thank you. You should go ahead and go to the next slide.
Or is this one actually Andrea's?
I can talk about the virtual observations.
Yeah, thanks,
so we are super excited to be piloting this. If you have been enjoying listening to the fantastic panelists and are like thinking, this sounds great, but what does it actually look like in practice? We are going to be, along with the link and the follow-up from this meeting email, you will be getting a link to a virtual observation list. And in that virtual observation list, you'll find the names and contact information of different teachers. And here we have, I sat in and observed Kylie's class, and I took some screenshots of her class. And Susan, could you go to the next slide? So in that virtual observation list, like I said, you'll get the link and the follow-up, and on next Tuesday in the Minnesota ABE Connect, there'll be an article about it with a link to that. You'll be able to find the name and the program of people who have agreed to be observed, their emails. So then if you're interested in observing, you can reach out and contact them by email. There'll also be their class days and times, the platform they're using, whether that's Zoom, Google Classroom, and then the level and instructional focus. So if you would like to observe a class, see how other teachers are handling synchronous teaching, this is a great opportunity for you. And we would ask that you read the observation guidelines that will be at the top of that list before contacting a teacher to begin observing. So just some norms for if you're going in and doing some virtual observation. So yeah, a huge thank you to the teachers who have agreed to be on that list. And that list is a living document. So if you know yourself or you know other teachers who would be comfortable with having observers come in and watch them, please send an email to me, Andrea Echelberger, and I will get them on that list, and we'll make sure that my email is on the list so people can reach out. All right, that's all I have for that.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder that tomorrow we are having a CCRS Instructional Leadership Summit. So while the registration technically has closed, we can work you in. If you are interested in joining us, please go ahead and let us know. We are happy to have you do that. Marisa, maybe you can chat out if they should still use the event link or if they should directly contact you at this point. I'll let you put us in contact with the best information, but for sure, it's virtual. You can still come. So join us. This is tomorrow. If you're involved with CCRS leadership, I hope you'll consider spending part of your day with us in this virtual conference. And we're conscious of the time, so I'll let you move to the next slide. A couple more coffee breaks coming up, one on English language arts, another with our friends at Panda for mental wellness coming up later this month. And then webinars. There's a webinar coming up this Monday with Lindsey, whom you heard from today, and also Christine Kelly will be joining us for a CCRS support webinar. You'll be sure to want to be a part of that. There's some great stuff afoot. Also, Andrea, who was also just speaking about pronunciation, will be doing more in pronunciation, specifically intonation on the 13th. If you work in adult career pathways, a couple things coming up, one on the 14th, and then another on integrated education and training, and then Literacy Minnesota hosting a volunteer focused webinar on the 20th. So lots of ways to remain connected.
And all of those are on the Atlas calendar, right?
Yeah, they are. And also, Marisa put in the chat that contact Gail if you still want to register for tomorrow. I think everyone already knows about the Schoology COVID group, but just a reminder, if you're not in there yet, please join us. And that link and such will be in the notes with this code. And read your newsletter. I'm not even going to say anything. Just read your newsletter. Yeah, good stuff in the newsletter. What else, Susan?
I think that brings us to the end. And I just have one last slide for everybody, which is the final slide I use on all my webinars, which is keep calm. This picture just makes me feel calm, so I always end my sessions with it. And then also there is the link to these slides. If you don't want to wait for the email that will be coming with the recording, you can find the slides at this tinyurl.com/May7teaching. And
Thank you.
get
And I
access to
thank
that right
Susan
now.
for organizing all of this. If the presenters, if you want to turn on your cameras briefly to say goodbye, we'd appreciate that. And the organizers behind the scenes making all the Zoom magic happen. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your time and your expertise. These are big questions you're all tackling, and you're tackling them with such grace and such expertise. It's really a joy to see. So thank you so much to Susan and all the panelists today, and for everyone who helped make this webinar happen. We appreciate it. We'll stick around for a couple minutes if people have additional questions. Otherwise, have a great rest of your Thursday. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.